that many leaders followed and were mentored by Julius Nyerere. And I would like to ask whether the mentorship was correct or wrong. What has happened today? In your opinion as a political leader, to what extent do you see mentorship playing a role in helping young people, erstwhile politicians, to become the politicians that are necessary for the 21st century and beyond? I take a lot of exception to some of the political leaders we have today. And of course the question is, what is Ruhweza doing about it? I am doing something about it right now. Have we lost out on mentorship? Because I can see from your story, everything that President Museveni, for example, has done can in one way or another be attributed to the mentorship that he received from President Nyerere. Is there, for example, in Tanzania, serious mentorship taking place? For example, I heard a story that former President Jakaya Kikwete was interested in becoming president. And the story we hear is that Julius Nyerere called him aside and said, he referred to him as a young man and said, young man, allow the likes of, what was the, Mukapa, and there was another one. Allow them to, Ali Hassan Mwinyi, allow them to do their part. Let them serve and go. Your time is coming. I don't know how far true that story is, but I think it's a good story, hopefully, if it is true, to begin our own reflection in the fight for constitutionalism, in the fight for upholding the rule of law and good governance. To what extent has there been support from the elderly, those who've been there to help our people who want to become leaders? Lastly, you mentioned something regarding the financial legacy of Julius Nyerere's family, or his family as a result of his legacy. And I think if I heard you correctly, you said his pension came a whole year after, and you know, he probably did not die a wealthy billionaire. My question is, in our day today, where no longer do we see the state as the leader of the market, where we see a lot of challenges regarding how the state is governed, and in the words of General Otafire, when he came to speak many years ago here on corruption, he said we're in a stage of primitive accumulation of wealth. Could you comment on what can be done? Because, you know, I once heard from somewhere else the comment that, you know, first of all, as lawyers, we are supposed to be wealthy. But you and I know that wealth, like the fight for academic freedom, grows slowly. But we are teaching a growing group of very impatient young people. They don't want to drive what Ruhweza is driving in 10 years' time. They want to drive that Mercedes Benz today, if possible, before the end of 4th year. And that for me is important. So in the broader scheme of things, the people who are supposed to lead all these conversations on good governance, the fight for corruption, and so on and so forth, are also impatient to resolve the financial question. Maybe you could comment on that. What, in your view, do you think would be the way forward? Lastly, I would like everyone here to stand and celebrate you, especially for the great sacrifice of those 16 bullets. If you would kindly...
Let us keep our questions short so that we're able to engage better with the Honorable.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, my friend Anna Reisman. It's a pleasure to meeting you. I was once a postgraduate training intern at Conrad Adenauer Stiftung, and that's where I happened to first of all have met your first book, Mr. Tundu Lissu. I read it from CAS offices. My name is Musana Jafari. the National Mobilization Secretary of the newly formed political party called RPP, Revolutionary People's Party. And I'm a Makererian. We are talking about Museveni having gone to where? To Tanzania. And, you know, he was well relinquished with knowledge and information. And he came. My question is, where did President Museveni throw the notes that he learned from Tanzania? Because Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere taught him all those things, you understand? For instance, peaceful, living power peacefully. Mwalimu did that. So where did Museveni leave the notes of living power peacefully? Then number 2, John Locke, he wrote a book, The Second Treatise of Government. We are talking about the interaction between law and politics. And that's where I'm going. John Locke talked about a legitimate government, whereby you have to use the law.
Hello, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
let now next time I kindly ask, because this is an intellectual debate. Next time you have to upgrade us. Thank you.
Once again, one question per person and get straight to it.
Oh, thank you so much, Honorable Tundu Lissu. It has been an insightful discussion, and I have a question I'm going to summarize. We have heard of Julius Nyerere. We have heard of the good stories about him. But what has hindered the information that we have heard from Honorable Tundu Lissu? What has hindered the masses from speaking evil or ill about him, that they want to prioritize him to be a saint? And if you look at leadership, don't you think that leadership may have some loopholes, that it won't be a smooth sail? And you talked about Honorable Julius Nyerere inspiring Museveni into the dictatorship. We are looking at something that was done by a neighbor. I'm failing to pay school fees for my children, and my children are not studying, and I'm saying that it's because of the neighbor that my kids are not studying. I am blaming my consequences. I'm blaming my effects, my atrocities to someone else. I feel like it's more of a decision one decides to make for them to achieve or reap what they may want to achieve. And you talked about a university being a safe space for us to speak about these things. And actually it doesn't make sense for us speaking of these things when we are at the university and we don't put them into practicability when we get out. It's like I'm studying to preserve it for the studies and I'm not going to apply it anywhere. So thank you so much, and those are the few questions I had. Thank you. Allow me to submit.
Thank you so much. My name is King Praise Apology. My question is a bit long, but I'm going to try and summarize it. I will just start with something that I felt kept recurring when Honorable was speaking, and it's something I got to learn about a few weeks ago, and it's that all authoritarians have a playbook, and from that playbook, they pick from each other. And right now we see that Nyerere was a mentor to Museveni and a lot of the policies that Museveni has today. He drew a gruesome picture of how bad the picture can get. And what stopped Nyerere was the fact that he was able to step down from power and say, okay, here is this peaceful transition and I'm giving it to you. But that's not the case for Uganda today, right? We have not been granted that peaceful transition, and there is someone who has gone even above and beyond what their mentor gave them. And the question then becomes, what do we do as young people who realize that we're in a place like this? And my thought has always been that it's for us to acknowledge that we are now under a dictatorship, and what is needed is a revolution of sorts. When George stood up and spoke, he spoke about how there is something happening about no reform, no election. And I would like to speak to the 2026 election. I've been tweeting a lot about this, and I felt now is an opportunity to talk about it. I ask again, given what is happening in Kawempe, which is just a by-election, people being abducted, people being killed, people being beaten and shot at, what is the efficacy of elections in such a system when they have existed for all the years that they have and they haven't yielded anything for us? What is the place for reform? Dr. Reza talks about a certain justification. Is there some room for justification of authoritarianism? And he says it could be justified if this leader has a good intention, but I don't think so, because democracy is the lesser evil, right? And from the context of a democracy, power is derived from the people, it's gotten from the people and given to this one leader. So it's easier to sensitize the masses to accept an idea than to force the people to accept the idea. But now when it comes to a point like this, where elections have failed to work for us in Uganda, what do? What's the revolutionary alternative? The question cuts across to whoever is on the bench. But I would like to say that it starts in small ways that we can. Not all of us can go to the street and protest, but we are having an election period within this university. Tell me why you would vote someone who affiliates themselves with all the evils that the NRM has created in this country. Tell me why you would vote someone in your school as a GRC without a total understanding of their manifesto, but just because they're your friends or they have given you a little bread. I see some people putting on tags for different people because they are running for different offices. When someone stops you and says, vote for me in this position, do you even ask them what their manifesto is? Do you ask them what their opinion is about the political issues in this country?
Praise.
In conclusion, I feel it's important for us to be honest with ourselves, basing on the story that
There is a question this side.
Thank you very much. I'll keep my question short. My name is Aishuka Alan, and I'm a fourth-year law student. I'm also a Secretary General of Africa Poetry Students Organization. It's a regional-based organization. I say that because we've been moving out there into institutions of learning, preaching about the legacy of Nyerere. And it seems my mind has just been sanitized of the excessiveness in which I've been preaching the good man. I now understand that we have to be critical at some stage. My concern is about the Nyerereism that continues to flow around the region. We are soon launching an Africa Poetry chapter in Tanzania, a few months from now. But our concern is East African Federation. We are seeing what is happening in Congo. It mirrors exactly what happened in Uganda in the 1980s. The strategy that M23 takes in, taking on a few parts, different stages, mirrors what happened here in Uganda. Do we have hope that this kind of mentorship that has neighbors enter the spaces of neighbors and destabilize neighbors, does it give us hope for the unity of East Africa? Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Mheshimiwa shikamoo. Naitwa Douglas Guti kutoka Temeke, Dar es Salaam. Douglas Guti kutoka Temeke. Guti. Yeah. Mheshimiwa, my question to you is, in the quest to recover from the authoritarian rule of Julius Nyerere as it was, I feel you as the chairperson of Chadema, congratulations upon being elected, but Chadema has failed the people of Tanzania. In 2015, Mheshimiwa, you very well know that Edward Lowassa, who was the former Prime Minister of Tanzania and a proud member of CCM, was given the card of Chadema to represent it on the presidential elections. President Magufuli, may his soul rest in eternal peace, won that peace. However, there was a contestation. And when you came to stand for presidency in 2020, Mheshimiwa, President Magufuli won with 84.4%, a win that was unprecedented and one that has never happened before. So don't we think, Mheshimiwa, that Chadema has failed the people of Dar es Salaam, and there has not been enough work that has been done to support the people of Dar es Salaam in the quest for democracy? Thank you.
We're going to have a very last question. Please keep it under 2 minutes.
Okay. I'm Semalash Rasenyanjo, law student here at Makerere. My question is, as you've been speaking about Mwalimu Julius Nyerere as a Pan-Africanist, we know that he was a member of the Monrovia group, not the Casablanca group. I would like you to throw some light about it. Why did he choose the Monrovia group that wanted progressive unity rather than the Casablanca group that wanted unity there and then, and yet in his own nation, Tanzania, he preached unity and even practiced it in a way that was violent and in a way that was, for me, it's justifiable. I think when he came to Uganda in 1979, he had to take over Uganda in order to unite it with Tanzania. Would have had, at least unit of Africa would have started from there to spread all over the continent. Thank you.
I've been informed we've been given 5 more minutes, so please keep it short to give other people an opportunity to ask questions.
Hello?
Okay, so we shall have you and then someone at the back there. Then Jibril, you'll go last.
Thank you very much, moderator. Okay, I'm Ilem Rodney. I'm a master's student at Makerere University doing political science, or doing public administration. They always say that 1 billion people being full doesn't make anything true. It makes 1 billion fools. What we call mentorship could be what we consider in political science as false consciousness. So, can we literally say that Museveni is being inspired by this false consciousness of authoritarianism, yet in the context of the 21st century, is being labeled as an authoritarian? That's number one. Number two, talk about Nyerere. I think there's also something to deal with the ideology that brought them up. Doing political science, we realize that there are some political philosophies that have been taken up by most of these political leaders. Socialism is one of them, Pan-Africanism, and communism that Nyerere wanted to create through his Ojama policy that some people say that it failed totally. What do you consider? Because with this Marxism, they fight for the proletariats, they fight for socialism, the dictatorial governments. Do you see it as something that we can always still cherish up to now, or we can definitely just abandon such ideas? Lastly, talking about this world situation, I feel like how do we now associate with such people at this moment, knowing clearly that to some extent their political ideas, their mentorship and all that has just been a fabrication? Yes? And how do we really relate with this information at this moment? Are they still relevant for us? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Unlike the large population that is here, I'm not a student of Makerere University. My name is Bangana Mohsin, a student of Victoria University. Putting that into consideration, I would like to go a little controversial from whatever is discussing at the moment. My question, therefore, as we are on the subject of democracy, my question to you, Honorable, is, don't you think as the African continent we have been sold the wrong idea of what democracy is? Don't you think we have also been sold with the wrong idea that by changing presidents we'll be able to have a better economy, we'll be able to have a better all these things? How about if I would pose a question? Who among us, the Western sold us the ideas that China, Russia are bad countries? Who among the Ugandan population would be given a visa to stay in Russia and would say, I would rather stay in Uganda? Or who among us would be given a visa to stay in China and say, I would rather stay in Uganda? The Western sold us these ideas that these countries are not democratic. These countries are authoritarian. So they want us to also believe that we should go that way. Look at the histories of how their Western countries were made. For example, look at the British Empire, how it came to be a superpower the way it is. It is because they had an authoritarian system that built them to the stage where they are, and now they can't afford democracy. We can't afford democracy where we are right now. There should be a strong arm that should put us there. Thank you very much.
Okay, my name is Jibril Sekandi, and I'm a Year 1 student, School of Law here. I have like 3 things. Firstly, I would submit that, like anyone or most of the people, the problem that most of Africans or people have is not the time that presidents stay in power, but the kind of services that people give during their time of service. We wouldn't cry over the president of Uganda if he had been a very good man. But that throws me to what I wanted to submit on, that I think that in my opinion, our constitution, in the way it's framed or its nature, the president was awake when everyone was asleep. What do I mean? That by the nature of powers given to him by the constitution and the checks, it seems as though that it created like a dictatorship already. Because you can't put me in power and give me power to get people to check that power. I think that's a blunder in our constitution.
Jibril, please.
Conclusively, our university seems to be an extension of the president's dining room. As everything that is happening here isn't any different from what the president would want. I submit.
So I've been informed of 2 insistent hands from the beginning. I started asking questions. So, but I'm only allowing you to speak on agreement that you ask 1 question. Okay. Can we have him and the gentleman at the back? Those are the 2. 1 question, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Nathan Biamukama, and I was a year ahead of Honorable Dar es Salaam. Probably you still remember me or you don't, but what I can tell the rest here, he was a very prison suits. So he was active in politics. So when those ones were, I saw some people here trying to vie for office, you must consult him. He was very active politically. Unfortunately, I entered when you had spoken, but I also know that you spoke on a subject probably which you understand very well. Having been taught by Issa Shiviji, and I know you are a very good friend. Issa has just written a book on Nyerere, the biography. I don't know the extent which you have referred to that book, but it is Development as Rebellion. No? Yeah, Development as Rebellion. Very interesting, where he analyzes Nyerere from the beginning up to the end, together with the Kamata and Osman. I have read it. And I was trying to figure out exactly the dictatorial part of it that you could have pointed out, which I missed. I would have loved to know that. But in those stories, and I know you know very well that Issa Shiviji was a very big critic of Mwalimu Nyerere, but a very big supporter of Mwalimu Nyerere as well.
Please, could we wrap it up?
So the point I'm making is, first, probably the extent to which you refer to that. Secondly, that I think also, you being a leader, a student leader, Museveni himself having been a student leader, probably you have a lot to share. Because one of the examples that Issa points out from that book is that we even could get students in 1966, I think, killing them, giving them chiboko at State House, sending them home, but returning again, bringing them back, and even appointing them positions of responsibility when they have completed school. Now, whether that is dictatorship or discipline, I don't know. But thank you very much, and I'm happy to see you again, as smart as you were at that time.
Thank you. Please. No, it's this gentleman here. That's the last question.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Maige. I'm Tanzanian. Let me declare my interest. Student here at Makerere, pursuing my master's in peace and conflict studies at CHUS. Welcome, Your Excellency, Mr. Chairperson, Tundu Antipas Lissu. I have one question to you. You are judging Mwalimu Nyerere as a dictator who managed to create a nation from more than 120 tribes, and also he refused to mine minerals until the Tanzanian get education and knowledge, who participated in liberation of all of frontline struggle across Africa, a president who didn't even want to buy a car for himself. Now you are saying his regime was dictatorial regime. I would like to ask you a question. Don't you think this speech you are making here demoralizes young generation towards struggles for good governance and patriotism? Thank you, I submit.
If you promise to keep it in one minute.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Charles. I have a question to Honorable Tundu Lissu, who is actually president in the making, and this is very important. You talked about the militarization of politics and the politicization of the armed forces. I think this is a monster which is eating up Africa in its entirety. So as a possible president, what is your take on this trend of militarizing politics and politicizing armed forces? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know we still have a lot more questions, but unfortunately, time is not on our side. Allow me to cheat protocol, Honorable, and ask a question, and this is very relevant to student leadership. I noticed that as you were speaking, you did not exactly tell us about your time in university, what political offices you got into, because that's a very important conversation. Yeah, so I would like to know. So I would like to know from you whether the whole student politics is relevant to the grander struggle out there. Is it relevant, or are we wasting time?
Well, thank you very much for very good questions. I have recorded 14 questions from you. I'm not sure I can answer them all in 10 minutes that I have. But let me try. Starting with the very last one about student politics. Student politics are the incubators, if you will, for politics out of here, out of the university. And therefore, by all means, you should take the politics of the university absolutely seriously. Mwalimu, just, you know, the 2 hours, 2 or so hours that we have spent here, if there is one thing they have shown is Mwalimu was a very complex character. Mwalimu was a very complex political figure. I think it is important to understand that complexity. The attempts to put him on a pedestal, the attempts to canonize him, whether as a secular saint or a religious one, are attempts to dehumanize Mwalimu. What we should do and what we should make sure we do is to humanize Mwalimu Nyerere. A great man, absolutely, but a man all the same. A fallible man. He never was. He never was, and he could never be a saint. And so for my 20 cents, I have tried to show that Mwalimu was human after all. He committed some very fundamental mistakes. There are stories that we cannot tell because of the shortage of time that may actually lead to us questioning some of his motives, because it is always told that the intentions were good. His intentions were honorable. But you should remember, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. He was a man, and a very complex man. His legacy continues to torment us, and I underline that, torment. The way our leaders are behaving today, these completely unaccountable and criminal behavior on the part of our leaders, has everything to do with the constitutional foundations that were laid by Mwalimu back in 1962, which created a president who was only accountable to his God. And therefore, how good was that? How good could that be? Mwalimu created a nation out of 120 tribes. I would say he created a very powerful state. Now, I'm not very sure whether a state is the same thing as a nation. We still have our 120 tribes. We still do. We were not fighting amongst ourselves in the 80 years that we were under colonialism. We have not fought amongst ourselves in the 64 years that we have been independent, that we have been the post-colonial. The post-colonial stability in Tanzania originates with the German colonialism. I think that is very important to point out. All right? Secondly, it is important to underline a very important fact, that in Mwalimu's state, if you examine it closely, actually you see a striking continuity between the colonial state and the post-colonial state. For example, the hallmark of the colonial state was the all-powerful figure of the colonial governor. How are the colonial governor's powers compared to the powers of the post-colonial presidents? The hallmark of the colonial state was its violent, oppressive character, characterized by a regime of rightless law and administrative fiat, characterized by the violence, state-orchestrated violence of the instruments of violence of colonial state, the police, the army, the prisons, the courts. How do they differ with today's state, whether in Uganda or Tanzania? And then there are some of the most obvious features, relics of colonialism. How do you call your district bosses here? You call them RDCs, yeah? Resident District Commissioners. Ausio. How did the British colonial state call them prior to 1962? District Commissioners. Your RDCs have powers, police powers. They can arrest you. They can detain you, right? Where did they get those powers from? From the district commissioners of the British colonialism. And you see the same thing in Tanzania. All right? So, that continuity between colonialism and post-colonialism, it must be emphasized. All right? And we often think that, the colonial state that we inherited at independence was unproblematic. It was deeply problematic because it was created for one purpose, to extract wealth from the colonized. It was not an instrument to protect you. It was an instrument to oppress you in order to exploit you for the benefit of where the colonialists had come from. How has it changed post-colonial, post-61 or 62? How has the nature of the Ugandan state different today from what it was prior to 1962? And these are questions that we always have to interrogate. What about ideologies and political philosophies? Mwalimu was a professed socialist. He wasn't a Marxist-Leninist like Mugabe, all right? He wasn't a Marxist-Leninist like Samora Machel, some of his political children. He was a Fabian socialist. He was a socialist of the social democratic type, the Western social democratic type. Kenyatta never had anything to do with socialism. Felix Houphouët-Boigny in Cote d'Ivoire, any other African head of state, Mobutu Sese Seko, one thing that unites them all is their authoritarianism, not their political or ideological courts they wore at one time or another. What they have in common is the oppression of their people. All right? Mwalimu Nyerere, we will perhaps never know, but hundreds, possibly thousands, were detained without trial in his 24 years of office as president. Detention without trial. Even the British colonial state, in its all oppressiveness, never had preventive detention law. That is a creation of independent Tanganyika. Mwalimu borrowed it from Ghana's Nkrumah. Was a preventive detention law was first enacted on the African continent by Kwame Nkrumah in 1960. In 1962, Mwalimu copied it almost word for word from Nkrumah's Ghana. The British never had it, you know? And you cannot say that the colonial state was democratic by any yardstick. It wasn't. But there are certain respects in which the post-colonial state has been even more oppressive of the people than the colonial state ever was. Since we are in Uganda, you remember the 90 days removal order for Ugandan Asians in 1972? Huh? You remember? Ausio? Eh? What happened in Tanzania in April of 1971? Under the cover of darkness, and when I say under the cover of darkness, I mean there was absolutely no debate. A law was rushed through Parliament, through the Parliament of Tanzania, under certificate of urgency. It was passed the same day, I think April 20th, 1971. Under that law, the government of Tanzania expropriated the real property, buildings of anyone whose building was valued at 100,000 shillings at that time, roughly around 20,000 pounds, and so on. 90% of them were Asians, were Tanzanian Asians. Within a year, almost 75% of Asians had left the country, penniless. A year later, when Idi Amin and they were given 90 days to leave, where did they go? Some tried to cross the border to Tanzania. They were prevented from getting into Tanzania. They ended up in Sussex in the UK, cities like Leicester and other British cities, and in Canada. So there are things that should make us wonder when we talk of these great men such as Mwalimu. What should I say? What else? What else? And how many minutes do I have? Let's hope I come back to Uganda. I don't have to wait another 11 years to come back here to talk again with the Ugandan students. I will say one thing that we have not mentioned at all: Mwalimu's foreign policy. I think if there is one thing that Mwalimu did us proud, was his progressive foreign policy. His progressive foreign policy. Mwalimu had a position, and his position was always based on principle and moral high ground. Had he been around today, Mwalimu will definitely have something to say about the genocide in Gaza. I have not heard a single head of state, except Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa, taking a position about the tens of thousands of Gaza residents who have been massacred by.
Here is a lesson too. Konrad Adenauer was also a man of his time. Konrad Adenauer has left us with great legacies that we as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung live in our work and like to be associated with. But once again, he was born in 1876. He came and took over the chancellorship in Germany in 1949, being quite an old man by then. And definitely he was a leader who would not only take very popular decisions. Some of his decisions went in contrary to the popular opinion. So yes, the role of the leader is not just to take popular decisions, and sometimes it is also to take decisions that the majority would not in that moment align with. That is the truth about being a leader. And he himself always was saying that power corrupts, and he was not excluding himself. So this is for me also always very important to say when I represent an institution that bears a name of a politician. That's number one. Number two is I represent, again here, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. I would like to read from what our mission statement says, and only a part of it. Through our work, we contribute towards securing and increasing peace, freedom and prosperity in Europe and throughout the world. We stand for personal responsibility, justice, and solidarity. We are firmly committed to liberal representative democracy, the rule of law, the social market economy, and European unification. We are guided by the Christian view of humanity. And if I turn around and read what the mission of Europec is, it is to promote respect for universal human rights, and we also have this in our mission statement: peace, you have heard it, democratic values, and the rule of law through teaching, action-oriented, and strategic research and outreach. And in our mission statement, we also talk about through which means we promote what we stand for. Why do I say this? Because I want to underline that this mission of ours, shaping democracy together, only works if we find partners with whom we can do it together. And this decision is always based whether we find partners in whom we find like-minded people. It does not mean that we need to align in everything and anything, but it does mean that we have certain ideas and certain visions in common. Nowadays, in many countries, partners who work with organizations from the West are called foreign agents. And sometimes my impression is that this term is being used very selectively, because we work with many different organizations, institutions, governments, political parties, civil society actors, academia, representatives from the private sector. And yet, this term is used only for a certain group among them. It is on you to judge and to observe for which one. But it is important for us as a Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, who we stand for democracy, that we do work with the pluralistic society that is reflected and represented in different sectors of the society, and of course politics as well. And we take pride in having a very diverse landscape of actors in Uganda, but also all over the world. And my third point is just to thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President, for moderating this session. It has not been an easy exercise. We could see all the hands behind us from where I was sitting, and that only shows the interest in such debates and the importance to open up this space for such conversations. And therefore, thank you very much once again to Europec for allowing this, to the School of Law and to the Makerere University, which is one of our partners at Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and we are always very happy to come back to the Makerere University and to work together with different entities at the Makerere universities to open up spaces for critical debate and exchange. Again, thank you very much. And of course, last but not least, Honorable Lissu, dear Tundu, thank you very much for agreeing to stay a bit longer in Uganda, pretty much just for this talk, just to be at the university and talk to the students. With this, Dr. Ruweza and Dr. Kabumba, once again, thank you for hosting us, and it was a pleasure and an honor for us to be here. Thank you.
Yes, we have come to the end of our public lecture and engagement today. Thank you so much for coming. Anna, you mentioned that you can see the enthusiasm that the student community has in such issues, and as I was sitting, I had an idea of a moot court competition on constitutionalism for the students, or something to do with academic writing. I don't know if the students would be open to that partnership with Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Are you open to that? Yes, okay. So, yes, so we're going to have a group photo. I've been guided, we're going to have a group photo from here. So, move down. Okay, so we're going to come to you, the panelists. We're going to stand there, then they'll take the photo.